Sarah Walker came home that evening with a tired smile, hoping for a quiet night after a long shift at the small community clinic where she worked. The late autumn air outside carried the last chill of early dusk, and the house smelled faintly of cinnamon from the candle she had left burning in the kitchen that morning. Everything felt normal, steady routine, the kind of routine she clung to ever since her husband Mark left 8 months earlier without much explanation. But the moment she stepped inside, she felt something different in the air, a silence that felt too heavy for a home where a 12-year-old boy lived. It was the kind of silence that makes a mother pause and listen closely. Ethan, her son, usually greeted her at the door, sometimes with questions about homework, sometimes asking what was for dinner, sometimes just wanting a hug after a long school day. Tonight, there was nothing, no footsteps rushing toward her, no voice calling out "Mom." No sound of the TV, no clatter from the kitchen, only silence. She placed her bag on the hallway table and called out his name. Her voice echoed softly through the house, but there was no reply. She felt something twist in her chest, a small flicker of worry growing with each step she took toward the stairs. Ethan was not the type to hide or ignore her. He had always been expressive, honest, and open with his feelings. He was the kind of boy who wore his heart on his sleeve, which made the sudden quiet even more alarming. She climbed the stairs, calling his name again. Her voice was calmer than she felt. She walked down the hallway toward his room, pushed the door open, and found it empty. The bed was made, the backpack neatly placed against the wall, the baseball glove he always forgot to put away actually sitting in its place on the shelf. Everything looked too tidy, too thoughtful, as if he had gone out of his way to make it look that way. Her heart beat faster, not out of fear but out of instinct she didn't quite understand yet. Something was off, something had shifted inside her home, so quietly she almost missed it. She turned toward her bedroom, thinking maybe he had fallen asleep there watching TV like he sometimes did when he missed her. When she pushed her bedroom door gently open, the soft evening light from the window spilled across the bed, and that was when she saw it, a small folded piece of paper lying right on her pillow, white against the dark blue pillowcase, standing out like it had been waiting for her. Her name was written across the front in Ethan's handwriting, careful and steady, the way he always wrote when he wanted to make sure something looked perfect. Sarah froze for a moment, staring at the letter, feeling something heavy settle inside her chest. It wasn't like Ethan to write notes for no reason, and certainly not ones left on pillows. She walked softly to the bed and picked it up. Her fingers trembled slightly as she unfolded the thin paper. Her son's words filled the page in small, neat letters. "Mom, I'm sorry, but I need to tell you how I feel." Just the first line made her swallow hard. Her breath caught, because kids didn't start letters that way unless they were hurting, unless something was too heavy inside them to say out loud. She kept reading but already felt her heart tighten, as if preparing for something she didn't want to know but needed to hear. Ethan wrote about how he had been feeling lately, how he had been trying not to upset her, how he stayed quiet so she wouldn't worry, how he felt he couldn't always talk because she seemed sad sometimes. He didn't blame her. He wasn't angry. He wasn't pointing fingers. He was simply trying to explain himself in the only way he knew he could without breaking down in front of her. Every sentence dug into her heart deeper than the last. She could feel his loneliness in the way he chose his words. She could feel his fear tucked between the lines. She could feel the weight he had been carrying, a weight far too heavy for a child his age. He wrote about watching her cry when she thought he was asleep, about hearing her talk to herself late at night, about noticing how she clutched old photos of her and Mark. He wrote about how he tried to be better so maybe things would get better too. With every word she read, guilt rose inside her, thick and suffocating. She had tried so hard to protect him from her heartbreak, from the pain she felt when Mark walked away. She had tried to smile through it, laugh through it, stay strong through it, but children saw through masks, especially children like Ethan who felt everything deeply. When she reached the last few lines, her vision blurred with tears she didn't realize had fallen. "I know you're tired, Mom, and I don't want to make your life harder. I'll try harder, I promise. I just don't want to make you sad anymore." Sarah pressed a shaking hand to her lips. The words felt like a knife, not because of anger or blame, but because of how much love and misunderstanding they held. Her son thought he was the reason she struggled. He thought he was part of her burden when he was the only reason she kept going. She sat on the edge of the bed, the letter still open in her hands, her heart breaking in a way she had not felt even when Mark left. There was something different about this pain, something sharper, something about knowing her son suffered quietly because he didn't want to trouble her. That hurt in a place she didn't know existed until now. Before she could process it fully, A sudden knock echoed from downstairs, loud and firm, the kind of knock that demanded attention, not patience. Her head jerked up, her breath catching. The timing felt strange, almost unreal. No one visited her unannounced anymore. Not since the separation, and certainly not at this hour. She set the letter down carefully on her pillow and stood up, wiping her tears quickly with the back of her hand. She didn't know who could be knocking, but something inside her whispered that this moment was connected to the letter in a way she didn't yet understand. She walked downstairs fast, her heart pounding harder with each step. The knock came again, sharper this time, echoing through the quiet house. She reached the door, hesitated for half a second and opened it. The man standing on the other side stole her breath for the second time that night. Mark, her estranged husband, stood on the doorstep, looking different than she remembered. His face looked tired, his eyes weary, and he held himself like a man who had been carrying his own weight for far too long. He didn't look angry or confident or distant like he had the night he walked out. He looked broken in his own way. He met her eyes and said her name the way he used to, quiet and almost careful, Sarah. She felt her chest tighten again, not out of longing, not out of anger, but out of confusion and disbelief. The letter upstairs was still fresh on her mind. And now the man who caused so much hurt stood at her door. Uninvited, unexpected. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice low, trying not to let her worry show, trying to stay strong even though she felt anything but. Mark swallowed hard, his gaze shifting briefly toward the staircase inside the house, almost as if he already knew what she held upstairs. "I need to talk," he said quietly. "It's important." Sarah didn't know yet that the letter on her pillow and the man on her porch were tied together in a way she wasn't prepared for. She didn't know that the silence in the house, the fear in her heart, and the pain in her son's words were all pieces of a truth she was about to face. She didn't know that opening the door that night would change everything again, but in a different way, deeper than before. And as she stepped aside and let him in, she felt the strange sense that the worst part of the night hadn't even begun yet, because she had not yet heard the real reason Mark had come, nor the part Ethan played in all of it. And the truth was waiting upstairs on a small piece of folded paper. Truth that would break her in a way she didn't expect, and also lead her to something she didn't know she still needed. Sarah closed the door behind Mark with a careful motion, trying to keep her breathing steady even though her chest felt tight. She didn't expect to see him again, not after 8 long months of silence. The house felt too small with him standing inside it, too quiet, too full of questions she wasn't ready to ask. Mark looked around as if the home had changed, but the truth was, he was the one who had shifted. His shoulders were tense, his eyes tired, and there was a strange heaviness in the way he stood that made Sarah feel uneasy. She didn't want to feel anything toward him, not anger, not longing, not sadness, but feelings had a way of rising even when she didn't want them to. What she felt most now was confusion, fear, and a strange sense that something was already unfolding upstairs even though they were standing in the living room. She crossed her arms, trying to keep herself steady. "You said you needed to talk," she said, keeping her voice firm. "Say whatever you have to say." Mark's jaw tightened for a moment as if the words were hard to form. He looked toward the stairs again, then back at her. "It's about Ethan." The moment he said their son's name, her stomach dropped. She forgot the hurt for a second and only felt fear. "What about him?" she asked quickly. "Did something happen?" Mark shook his head. "Not in the way you think," he said, but he didn't explain fast enough, and the delay made her even more anxious. She stepped closer, her hands tightening into fists. "Then what?" Mark exhaled slowly and reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a folded piece of paper. It looked similar to the one she had found on her pillow. The same neat handwriting, careful and honest. Sarah felt her heart lurch as he held it out to her. She took it with shaking hands, her breath catching before she even opened it. She could feel her pulse rising as she unfolded the letter, fearing what she'd see, fearing what her son had written when she wasn't there to listen. The first line hit her harder than she expected. "Dad, I can't make Mom sad anymore. I can't fix anything. I think I only make things worse." Sarah pressed a hand to her mouth, her breath unsteady. The words blurred for a moment, and she blinked hard to read on. Ethan wrote about hearing arguments before Mark left, how he thought it was his fault because he asked too many questions or got in trouble at school sometimes. He wrote about trying to be perfect last year when things got tense between his parents. He wrote about thinking that if he became the kind of kid who never caused problems, maybe his dad would stay, maybe his mom would smile more, maybe things would go back to normal, but instead Mark left, and in Ethan's young, confused mind that meant he had failed. Sarah felt a sharp pain spread through her chest. Not just sadness but heartbreak for the Child who thought he carried the responsibility of two adults. Her voice broke when she finally managed to speak. Why didn't he tell me this? Mark rubbed the back of his neck, guilt written across his face. He told me yesterday, he said softly. He came to find me. Sarah shot him a shocked look. He what? Mark nodded, looking ashamed. He showed up at the construction site where I work now. He said he needed to talk. He said he couldn't tell you because he didn't want you to feel worse. Sarah felt her legs weaken. She sat on the edge of the couch, the letter still in her hands. The thought of her son standing alone at a construction site, looking for his father, trying to fix something that was never his responsibility, made her want to cry all over again. Why would he think he had to carry that burden? She whispered, more to herself than to Mark. Mark lowered himself into a chair across from her, his expression full of regret. Because I didn't handle things right. He admitted, when I left, I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought distance would stop the fighting, stop the stress, but all I did was leave the two people I loved most without answers. His voice cracked slightly, and Sarah had to look away. Not because she forgave him, but because she didn't want to see the guilt she had carried alone now mirrored in him. She couldn't deny her own mistakes either. She wasn't perfect. She had cried too much, panicked too often, and tried too hard to hide her sadness. Behind forced smiles, maybe Ethan had seen more than she realized. Maybe the walls she tried to build around her heart had been too thin for a sensitive child like him. Before she could speak, there was a sound on the staircase, soft footsteps, hesitant and small. Ethan stood halfway down the stairs, gripping the railing tightly. His eyes were red, and his cheeks were damp. He must have been there for a while, listening, maybe hearing more than a child should. Sarah's heart clenched when she saw him. She stood quickly, but he took a small step back, fear flickering across his face. Not fear of her, but fear of disappointing her, fear of saying the wrong thing, fear of making things worse again. Ethan, she said gently, wiping her tears quickly so he wouldn't think he caused them. Come here, sweetheart. He shook his head, his voice small and trembling. I didn't mean to make everyone upset, he said quietly. I just wanted things to get better. Sarah moved slowly toward him, not wanting to push him but wanting him to feel safe. You didn't do anything wrong, she whispered. Not a single thing. But Ethan kept shaking his head, the tears falling faster now. If I was better, Dad wouldn't have left, you wouldn't cry, we wouldn't fight. Sarah stopped halfway up the stairs, feeling her heart split in two. No, she said, her voice firm but full of love. You are not the reason anything went wrong. You are the best thing in my life. Ethan wiped his face with the sleeve of his hoodie, looking between his parents with confusion and fear. Then why did everything fall apart? He whispered. Why did Dad leave? Why are you sad all the time? Sarah looked back at Mark, giving him a silent push to say something. For once Mark stepped forward. Because of me, he said honestly. Not because of you, not because of your mom. I left because I didn't know how to handle my own problems. I made mistakes. I hurt both of you. Ethan's chin shook as he tried to hold back another wave of tears. I thought if I became perfect you'd come home. Mark shook his head and walked up the stairs slowly, stopping a few steps below his son. You don't need to be perfect for me to love you, he said. You never did. Ethan looked down, whispering shakily. Then why didn't you say goodbye? Mark closed his eyes for a moment, guilt washing over him. Because I was weak, he said. And I didn't want you to see me fall apart. The air grew heavy with all the unspoken things they had carried separately, all the quiet pain hidden behind closed doors, but now it was all out in the open, and it felt both overwhelming and strangely freeing. A long pause stretched between them, the kind of pause that comes before truth begins to heal instead of hurt. Ethan looked at his father, then at his mother, then whispered, I just wanted us to be a family again. Sarah's heart ached at those words. She stepped up one more step, close enough to touch him. We are still a family, she whispered. Just a broken one trying to heal. Ethan blinked hard, then finally moved, stepping into her arms as she wrapped him tightly, holding him with every bit of strength she had left. She felt him shaking against her, felt the pain he had been carrying alone, and wished she could erase every fear from his heart. Mark stood close, his eyes red, wanting to reach out but unsure if he had the right, unsure if forgiveness was something he deserved. But in that moment, the truth was clear to all three of them. The hurt wasn't gone, the past wasn't fixed, and the future wasn't certain. Yet they were standing together for the first time in months, sharing the weight instead of carrying it alone. And deep down, Sarah sensed something else too. Ethan wasn't just hurting. He was hiding something more, something deeper, something waiting to be spoken. She saw it in the way he avoided her eyes, the way his body tensed, the way he clung to her like he was afraid of something. She didn't understand yet, and she knew part 3 would reveal the truth he was still afraid to say. Sarah held Ethan close on the staircase, feeling every small tremor in his shoulders as he cried into her sweater, and though she whispered comfort into his hair, she sensed something deeper in the way he clung to her, something unsaid, something heavy he still feared to share. She brushed his hair back gently and tried to lift his face, but he kept his eyes down, gripping the railing with his free hand as if bracing himself. Mark stood a few steps below them with a look of regret and longing mixed into one, and even though Sarah wasn't ready to think about her feelings toward him, she could tell he cared deeply for the boy they had created together. The house felt impossibly quiet, the kind of quiet that comes right before a truth breaks open. Ethan pulled away from her slowly, wiping his face with both hands, trying to steady himself the way children do when they want to be brave but don't know how. Sarah waited, letting him find his voice because pushing him would only make him shut down more. After a long moment he finally whispered, "There's more I didn't tell you," and the words came out so soft she almost didn't hear them. She exchanged a quick glance with Mark before kneeling down on the steps so she could be eye level with her son. "You can tell me anything," she promised. "Nothing you say will make me leave, and nothing you say will make me love you less." Ethan took a shaking breath and looked back and forth between his parents, swallowing hard. "I thought if I didn't talk, if I stayed quiet, if I didn't bother you, you'd stop crying," he whispered. "I thought if I acted like everything was normal, you wouldn't hurt anymore." Sarah felt tears burn behind her eyes again, not because of what he said, but because of how much pressure he had carried alone. "Oh, sweetheart," she whispered, pulling him into another hug. But he gently pushed away this time, needing to continue. "And I didn't tell you something else," he said, his voice cracking, "because I didn't want to make anything worse." Sarah tried to stay calm though fear crawled slowly up her spine. "Tell me," she whispered. Ethan's shoulders tightened and he looked down at the floor. "Kids at school keep asking why Dad left," he said. "And I never know what to say, so I tell them everything is fine, but it never feels true." Mark winced visibly, guilt tightening every line in his face. Ethan continued quickly before either parent could speak. "And I hated lying, I hated pretending things were okay, but I didn't want anyone to think our family was broken." Sarah felt her heart twist sharply, realizing her son had been fighting battles she didn't even see. Ethan kept talking, the words spilling now that the dam had cracked. "When you would cry in your room, I heard you," he said quietly. "I pretended I didn't, but I did, and I didn't know how to help you. And when I saw Dad yesterday, I thought maybe if I talked to him myself, he would fix everything." Sarah covered her mouth, overwhelmed. "You went alone," she whispered. "You shouldn't have had to do that." Ethan nodded slowly. "I thought it was the only way." Mark stepped forward, unable to stay silent. "I'm so sorry, buddy," he said softly. "You should never have felt like you had to solve our problems." Ethan looked up at him, eyes wet. "Then why didn't you come home?" he asked. "Why didn't you fix things before I had to?" Mark closed his eyes, the question hitting him harder than anything Sarah could have said. "Because I was scared," he said honestly. "I didn't know how to be the husband your mom deserved or the dad you needed, and instead of trying harder I ran away." Ethan's lip trembled. "But I needed you," he whispered, and the words were like a knife for both parents. Mark stepped up 2 more stairs so he was right in front of his son, but not touching him, giving him the space he seemed to need. "I know," he said, "and leaving you was the biggest mistake of my life." The room fell still and Sarah felt something shift between all 3 of them, something honest and painful but necessary. Ethan wiped his face again, breathing unevenly. "And there's one more thing," he said, and his voice was even smaller now. "I thought if I worked really hard, maybe you two would love each other again." Sarah felt her breath catch as she understood the deeper wound. "Oh, Ethan," she whispered. "Love doesn't disappear because of children or mistakes, and it doesn't come back because someone tries to act perfect." Ethan shook his head stubbornly. "But I thought maybe if I did better in school or kept my room clean or didn't make noise or didn't ask for anything, maybe you would miss Dad, and maybe Dad would miss us, and maybe things would go back to the way they were." Sarah reached for him again, this time holding both his hands so he couldn't pull away. "You don't have to earn our love," she said firmly. "You never did." Ethan started crying again, tears falling fast. "I just didn't want us to be broken forever," he said. "I didn't want us to be the family people felt sorry for." Sarah's chest felt tight with the truth of it. The pain she had tried to hide had only made him feel more alone. She smoothed his hair back gently, trying to swallow her own tears. Families don't break because of kids, she said. They break because adults forget how to listen, how to talk, how to stay. Ethan looked at his father again, eyes full of hope and hurt tangled together. Are you staying? He whispered. Mark inhaled deeply. I want to, he said. But I don't want to come back unless your mom wants that too. Sarah felt all the air leave her lungs, because suddenly the moment wasn't just about Ethan, it was also about the question she had been avoiding for months. What did she want? She looked at Mark and saw the man she married, the flaws, the regrets, the mistakes, but also the tenderness he once showed her, the love they once shared, the life they once built together. But she also saw the man who left her alone with a hurting child, the man who walked out when things got hard, the man she wasn't sure she could trust again. The room grew quiet as she struggled internally. Ethan sensed the tension and looked terrified. Please don't fight, he whispered. Please don't leave again, either of you. Sarah breathed deeply, steadying herself. She placed a hand on her son's cheek and looked him in the eyes. We're not fighting, she promised. We're figuring out what is best for you. Ethan asked again in a trembling voice. Are we gonna be okay? Sarah smiled through her tears. We will be okay, she said softly. Because we're together now, Mark nodded, voice thick with emotion. And I'm not walking away again, he said. Not from you, not from your mom, not from our family. Ethan finally broke, sobbing into both their arms as Sarah and Mark held him, their hands meeting for the first time in months, not with romance, not with certainty, but with shared responsibility, shared pain, and a fragile but real hope. Sarah didn't know what the future would hold. She didn't know if she and Mark would rebuild their marriage. She didn't know if forgiveness would come, or if things would ever be the way they once were. But as she stood there with both of them in her arms, she made one quiet promise inside herself. She would choose whatever path healed her son. And she felt deep down that Mark returning wasn't only for Ethan. There had been something else in his eyes, a softness she remembered, a longing she hadn't been ready to see. She wasn't ready to decide anything yet, but she wasn't closing the door either, not this time, not when something inside her whispered that their story wasn't finished. They stood there on the stairs for a long time, wrapped in a moment that felt like the start of something fragile but important. And as the house settled into a softer silence, Sarah realized that the letter on her pillow had broken her open. Only so something new could finally begin to heal.